Run a small test in your head. If you could create money at no cost, would you still feel obligated to earn it? And if you could profit from someone else's desperation, would you call that business or harm? Those questions sound modern. A scholar asked them 1,000 years ago. His name was Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali. He lived in an age of caravans, coin, court politics, and scholarly debate, yet his ideas read like a blueprint for why money must be restrained by ethics, or it becomes a weapon. Scene 1. A market street in Baghdad. Cloth merchants lay out dyed wool. Spice sellers measure saffron. A buyer wants soap, a seller wants grain, a third wants copper. Barter could work, but it is slow, awkward, and unfair. Everyone wastes time searching for a double coincidence of wants. Then a small disk of metal settles the argument. A dinar or dirham. A coin that almost nobody wants for its own sake, yet everyone accepts because everyone else accepts. The coin is a social technology. It allows exchange to scale beyond neighbors and family. Now the part most people miss. Once money becomes the language of trade, the integrity of that language becomes a moral issue. If the measuring stick is crooked, every deal is contaminated. Al-Ghazali's key move was to treat money not as a thing to worship, but as a tool with a purpose. He argued that gold and silver, stamped into coins, are like a neutral judge between goods. They do not feed you or clothe you. Their value is relational. They exist to measure, to mediate, and to store value so trade can happen smoothly. That sounds technical, but it carries an ethical charge. If money is a judge, you are not supposed to imprison the judge. You are not supposed to forge the judge's rulings, and you are not supposed to sell the judge's authority for private advantage. This is where his thought becomes sharper than a lecture about greed. He wasn't saying money is evil. He was saying money has a function, and misuse breaks society. Before the ideas, notice the man. Al-Ghazali trained in law and theology, then rose fast. In his 30s, he taught in Baghdad at the Nizamiya. Students crowded his lectures. Patrons listened. Power brushed his sleeves. Then he collapsed inward. He described a crisis in which certainty dissolved and ambition tasted like dust. He left his post, walked away from prestige, and spent years in retreat before returning to teaching later in life. Out of that experience came his great synthesis, the Ihya, where everyday acts, earning, buying, selling, are treated as moral training. That biography matters because his economics is not the cold math of a clerk. It is the ethics of someone who watched status and wealth pull at the soul and who wanted markets without predation. So when he speaks about money, he begins with intention. The moral question is not, do you have money? It is, what is money for? If its purpose is exchange and stability, then using it to dominate others is a misuse, like using a medical tool to injure. Scene 2. A market inspector walking through a bazaar. He checks weights and measures, lifts a scale, looks at the balance. This role captures the principle that markets need rules to stay trustworthy. A scale that cheats by a few grains is not a private quirk. It is a tax on every buyer who cannot detect it. Money is the same, only larger. A dishonest coin is a dishonest scale in everyone's pocket. That is why Al-Ghazali ties monetary integrity to justice. Justice is not only courts, it is standards that keep ordinary exchange from becoming a daily ambush. He also understood that money's usefulness creates a psychological trap. Because money can be exchanged for anything, it feels like a master key. People begin to treat it as the final good, rather than a bridge to real goods. When that happens, virtues decay into calculations, and communities thin. But here's the twist. He did not ask people to abandon commerce. He asked them to domesticate money, keep it as a servant. That means resisting deals that convert need into guaranteed profit, and resisting behaviors that freeze money in chests without purpose. Another bridge between money and morality in his world was the charitable endowment, the waqf. Picture a deed that sets aside a shop or a garden whose rent will fund a school or hospital. The asset generates income, and the income becomes public benefit year after year. Wealth becomes responsibility made durable. Now step into a modern city and the scenes change, but the incentives rhyme. A payday loan storefront replaces the seed lender. A complex contract with hidden fees replaces the simple IOU. The moral test is the same. Is profit earned by sharing risk and adding value, or by exploiting confusion and desperation? And a final twist worth stating plainly. This moral view does not require you to be anti-market. It requires you to be pro-trust. Markets expand when trust expands. Trust expands when standards are protected and the weak are not routinely cornered over time. Start with hoarding. If money's role is to circulate and facilitate exchange, then hoarding is not merely personal caution. At scale, it becomes a social blockage. Imagine a city where coins disappear into chests. Sellers struggle to find buyers with cash. Prices become unstable. Trade slows. Craftsmen lay off apprentices. The harm is indirect, but real. But here's the twist. Al-Ghazali did not condemn saving for legitimate needs. He targeted a specific behavior, treating money as an end in itself, as if piling coins were the purpose of life. He saw that as a spiritual illness and an economic distortion at the same time. Next comes counterfeiting and debasement. Picture a mint room. Anvils, dies, molten metal, and officials. If the state reduces the silver content of a coin while keeping the same stamp, it quietly transfers wealth. Merchants will notice. Better coins will vanish as people stash them. Worse coins will flood the market. Trust will thin. Here is where everything breaks. Once trust in the coin weakens, trade begins to demand a premium for risk. Prices rise not because bread changed, but because money became uncertain. The market starts charging for doubt. Al-Ghazali treated this as a moral failure because it violates fairness in exchange. The coin is a public standard. To corrupt it is to cheat strangers who never consented to the trick. Now move to lending and interest, the most debated area. In Al-Ghazali's world, scholars were wrestling with riba, illicit gain in exchange and lending. His concern was not to ban profit. Commerce and partnership were normal. The concern was a specific kind of profit, gain that comes merely from owning money, without sharing risk, and especially profit extracted from the vulnerable through necessity. Consider a simple scene. A farmer's crop fails. He needs seed. A lender offers cash today in exchange for more cash later, guaranteed. The farmer bears the uncertainty of weather and harvest. The lender bears almost none. If the farmer succeeds, the lender wins. If the farmer fails, the lender still demands payment, pushing the farmer toward ruin. Al-Ghazali's framework highlights the imbalance. When return is fixed and risk is one-sided, money becomes a lever that can lift wealth upward without producing anything. That is not a complaint about rich people. It is a warning about an incentive system that rewards exploitation disguised as contract. But here's the twist. He also understood why credit exists. Trade needs financing. Caravans need capital up front. Shops need inventory. The question is how to structure finance so it funds production and trade without turning debt into domination. This is why his world valued partnership models where profit and loss could be shared. Arrangements that tie return to outcome, not mere passage of time. In modern terms, it is the difference between financing that participates in risk and financing that transfers risk downward. Now look at his deeper moral claim. Money is necessary for society, but it tempts the soul because it can buy almost anything. When a society forgets money's function, people start treating it as ultimate. That spiritual shift produces economic damage, bribery, fraud, hoarding, and predatory contracts. You can hear this in his metaphorical style. He compared money to something like a mirror. It has no color of its own, yet it reflects every color. In itself, it is empty. In use, it becomes powerful. That is why it can be both useful and dangerous. Bring this into a broader political economy. Medieval Islamic lands were integrated into wide trade routes, from the Mediterranean to Central Asia and India. Money flowed through long distances. The stronger the network, the more important trust becomes. A dishonest coin in one city can poison confidence across many markets. So Al-Ghazali's moral economics was not abstract. It was governance advice. Protect the currency, keep contracts fair, prevent obvious exploitation, encourage charity and social support. In doing so, you stabilize trade, reduce desperation, and lower the incentive for predatory finance. Now, how does this translate to a modern viewer who uses fiat money, credit cards, and digital accounts? Start with the principle, not the technology. His central insight is that money is a public instrument. Even when privately held, it works only because society agrees to honor it. That makes monetary integrity a shared responsibility. Inflation is a useful modern parallel. When purchasing power falls unexpectedly, it transfers wealth between groups. Debtors can benefit, savers can lose, wage earners can lag. Some of that is unavoidable in shocks. But when inflation is driven by policy mismanagement or hidden financing, it resembles the old debasement. Problem: the measuring stick changed while people were still using it. Another parallel is financial engineering that extracts returns without sharing risk. A contract can be legally valid and morally corrosive. If profit is built on asymmetry, one side doesn't understand the terms or cannot refuse them, then the deal may be efficient on paper and destructive in life. Now, the part most people miss. Al-Ghazali offers a way to evaluate these systems without slogans. He asks you to watch three things: purpose, fairness, and trust. Purpose. Does this monetary practice serve real exchange, production, and stability, or does it turn money into a self-licking machine? Fairness. Are gains tied to effort and risk, or are they guaranteed by trapping the weaker party? Trust. Does the system strengthen the credibility of money and contracts, or does it slowly teach everyone to assume cheating? You can stage this as a closing scene: a judge's court, a market, and a mint. 3 rooms that decide whether commerce is peaceful or predatory. In the court, contracts are enforced. In the market, prices emerge. In the mint, standards are protected. If any of those rooms become corrupt, the poor pay first, and eventually the entire economy pays. So here is the checklist you can keep. First, treat money as a measure, not a trophy. If it becomes the goal, the system will bend toward hoarding and corruption. Second, protect the standard. Whether coins or digital currency, hidden dilution is a social tax. Third, insist that finance shares risk. The more return is detached from risk, the more likely exploitation becomes. Fourth, reward trade and production more than mere leverage. Societies grow when capital serves work, not when work serves capital. Fifth, build buffers of charity and mutual support, because desperation is the fuel of predatory contracts. Al-Ghazali's genius was to connect these points into one moral architecture. Money is necessary, but it must remain a servant. When it becomes the master, it changes people, and then it changes markets.